What if your neighborhood grocery store vanished forever? Imagine waking to empty shelves, long bus rides, and prices so high that dinner becomes a daily struggle. This isn't fiction. This is Woonsocket, Rhode Island. When the last grocery stores closed, thousands were thrown into a food desert where feeding your family became a battle for survival. How do you keep hope alive when hunger is everywhere? This is the story of resilience, of a mother fighting for her children against impossible odds. Now, hear from Laura, a mother of 3, sharing what it's like to live inside America's hidden food deserts.
What happens when an entire city's grocery stores disappear one by one, leaving families to choose between a 3-hour bus ride or paying $4 for a gallon of milk at a corner store? I'm Laura, and I watched my hometown of Woonsocket, Rhode Island transform from a place where fresh food was abundant into a nightmarish food desert where feeding my 3 children became a daily battle for survival. When the IGA closed in 2009 and Price Right followed in 2014, tens of thousands of us were suddenly living on an island, cut off from the basic necessities that most people take for granted. The psychological terror of food anxiety, constantly calculating whether you have enough, whether you can afford it, whether it will last, consumed my life in ways I never imagined possible. But it wasn't always this way. I want you to picture Woonsocket in 2001, not the hollow shell you might see today, but a place where the scent of fresh Portuguese bread drifted from corner bakeries, and my children could skip to 3 different grocery stores without crossing a single busy street. The air carried hints of garlic from the family-owned markets, and every morning felt like walking through a neighborhood that actually wanted to feed you. I moved here as a young mother of 3, drawn by rent I could actually afford, and neighbors who still remembered each other's names, where the IGA on Social Street felt like the beating heart of our entire community. The abundance was intoxicating in ways I didn't fully appreciate until it vanished. I could walk to the IGA for fresh produce, feeling the firm skin of apples and the weight of ripe tomatoes in my palm, then pop into Silva's Portuguese market for specialty items like imported olives and that incredible linguiça that made my kitchen smell like heaven. Even the smaller corner stores stocked real ingredients, fresh herbs, decent bread, milk that hadn't been sitting under fluorescent lights for weeks. All of this existed within a few blocks of my front door, creating a food landscape that made cooking feel effortless and spontaneous. My weekly routine became a dance of comparison shopping, but not out of desperation, out of pure choice. I'd check prices between stores, feel fruit for ripeness with the confidence that I had options, and chat with other mothers about seasonal specials and which store had the best deals on meat. Mrs. Rodriguez would tell me when the IGA marked down their day-old bread, while Carmen from upstairs shared tips about Silva's weekend sales on fresh fish. Carmen often reminded me that her grandmother could walk to 3 grocery stores from her apartment just like we could, a luxury that seemed as permanent as the sidewalks beneath our feet. I organized communal cooking events where neighbors would bring ingredients and we'd prepare meals together. The kitchen windows fogged with steam from simmering soups and the laughter of children playing nearby while we chopped vegetables and shared stories. My apartment became a gathering place where Portuguese grandmothers taught young mothers their secret spice combinations, where teenagers learned to appreciate flavors beyond fast food, and where the smell of shared meals created bonds that felt stronger than blood family. We'd make huge pots of soup and divide them into containers, everyone taking home enough for several dinners. The social fabric was woven through food in ways that felt completely natural. Birthday cakes shared between apartments, emergency cups of sugar borrowed at midnight, and the unspoken understanding that fresh food was simply there when you needed it. My children learned to appreciate different flavors and textures, trying everything from Portuguese linguiça to fresh fish from the market, their palates expanding with each new discovery. But even in those golden days, I noticed small changes that should have worried me more. A few empty shelves here, a slightly wilted lettuce display there, and by 2007, the IGA's produce section had begun shrinking month by month, though I told myself I was imagining things. Sometimes I'd find myself settling for second-choice ingredients because my first choice was missing, but I adapted without questioning why adaptation was becoming necessary. What I didn't know was that forces far beyond my control were already preparing to carve away everything that made feeding my family feel effortless and joyful. The mounting unemployment that swept through Woonsocket in 2007 created a dread that settled into our bones like winter cold. When the mills started shutting down and laying off workers by the hundreds, as James Murphy later testified, the ripple effects hit every corner of our community. Suddenly, every grocery trip became a calculated risk where each decision felt like choosing between feeding my children today or having money for rent tomorrow. Do we buy the good meat this week or stretch the cheap cuts for 2 meals? Do we get fresh vegetables that might spoil or canned ones that taste like metal but won't go bad? I developed what I now call crisis shopping skills, and they consumed my thoughts in ways that felt both necessary and degrading. Like so many other Woonsocket mothers, I memorized prices down to the penny. Ground beef was $3.49 at IGA, but $3.29 at the Portuguese market if you bought it before noon on Tuesdays. Laura Santos and I would swap tips about markdown days, while Carmen Rodriguez shared her discoveries about which stores rotated their discount stickers first. I learned to substitute expensive ingredients with cheaper alternatives, replacing fresh herbs with dried ones, trading real butter for margarine, and discovering that pasta with olive oil and garlic could stretch into 3 meals if you added enough bread. Tony, the IGA manager who'd worked there for 15 years, started confiding in me during those late afternoon discount hunts. He'd watch me sort through the day-old bread and bruised apples with a look that mixed pity and understanding. Corporate was pressuring him to reduce the produce section to cut costs, he told me, and foot traffic was dropping so fast that they were considering closing on Sundays. His voice carried the weight of someone watching something die slowly, and I could see him calculating whether he'd have a job by Christmas. I watched other mothers in the aisles, their faces tight with the same calculations I was making. Their children learning to accept no more often than yes when they asked for treats. Mrs. Santos would spend 20 minutes comparing pasta sauce prices, her daughter tugging at her sleeve while she decided whether the 30-cent difference was worth stretching their budget. Young mothers I'd once shared recipes with now shared coupons and tips about which day the bakery marked down their bread. Our conversations shifted from cooking adventures to survival strategies, and the joy drained out of food talk like water from a cracked pot. The stress began manifesting in physical ways that terrified me more than the empty bank account. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. calculating whether we had enough milk for the week, whether the bread would last until my next trip, whether I could make one more meal stretch to cover an extra day. My body started treating sleep as a luxury I couldn't afford, keeping me alert to monitor our dwindling food supplies like a guard watching for enemies. I thought I was adapting, becoming resourceful and resilient, but what I was really doing was normalizing the slow strangulation of my family's food security, mistaking survival for strength. What I didn't realize was that all this careful budgeting and strategic shopping was just preparation for something far worse, a blow that would shatter even these fragile routines I'd built to keep us fed. I'll never forget walking up to the IGA on that cold February morning in 2009, expecting to grab milk and bread for breakfast, only to find a small posted notice taped to the glass door that made my blood run cold. Closed permanently. Thank you for your patronage. The words looked so casual, so final, written in black marker on white paper like a note you'd leave for the mailman. But this wasn't a temporary closure or a renovation notice. This was a death certificate for the heart of our neighborhood. And I stood there reading it over and over, waiting for the words to change into something that made sense. The closure wasn't announced anywhere. No warning in the local paper, no farewell sale to clear inventory, no time to mentally prepare for what felt like losing a vital organ from our community's body. One day Tony was telling me about corporate pressure, and the next day he was gone, along with every shelf, every shopping cart, every fluorescent light that had illuminated our daily bread for decades. Tom Chen, who'd managed the store for years, later confessed that closing felt like abandoning the neighborhood. But corporate had given him no choice. The windows that once displayed weekly specials now reflected my confused face back at me, and the parking lot felt like a graveyard where something essential had been buried without ceremony. The immediate panic was suffocating in ways I couldn't have imagined. Where would I shop now? Price Right was across town, requiring 2 bus transfers that would eat up an entire morning, or begging my husband to drive me after his already exhausting work shifts that left him barely functional by evening. I stood there calculating the logistics in my head. How much time, how much money, how much planning would now be required for something as basic as buying milk, and the numbers made my chest tight with anxiety. Dozens of other neighbors gathered in that empty parking lot throughout the morning, all of us wearing the same confused, betrayed expressions, as if we'd all been collectively abandoned by something we'd taken for granted. Mrs. Rodriguez clutched her shopping list and stared at the locked doors. Mr. Silva shook his head and muttered in Portuguese, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he processed what this meant for his daily routine. Young mothers with toddlers in tow looked around desperately, as if another grocery store might materialize from thin air to replace what we'd lost. My shopping routine, once a pleasant walk through the neighborhood where I'd bump into friends and chat about sales, transformed overnight into a military operation requiring advanced planning, coordinated transportation, and enough cash to make fewer, larger purchases. No more running out for a single ingredient or grabbing something I'd forgotten. Every shopping trip would now consume hours and require the same preparation as a major expedition. The social connections I'd built around food, those casual conversations in checkout lines with other mothers, the impromptu recipe exchanges with neighbors, the sense of community ownership we all felt toward our neighborhood store evaporated overnight like steam from a pot with the lid suddenly removed. The IGA's death marked the moment I realized we were no longer customers with choices. We had become refugees in our own neighborhood, forced to adapt to whatever scraps of food access remained in an increasingly hostile landscape. Between 2010 and 2014, I became an unwilling witness to grocery store death, not the sudden shock of closure, but the slow, agonizing decay of Price Right as it gradually poisoned itself from the inside out. What started as my lifeline after the IGA closed began showing symptoms of the same disease that had killed our neighborhood store. The produce section shrank month by month. Prices crept higher without explanation, and there was an unmistakable smell of desperation hanging in those fluorescent-lit aisles like spoiled milk left too long in the sun. I watched the fresh fruit displays shrink with each visit, the selection growing smaller and more expensive while the quality plummeted in ways that made my stomach turn. Apples that looked fine on the surface revealed brown, mealy flesh when you bit into them, their sweetness replaced by a texture that felt like wet cardboard dissolving in your mouth. The banana display went from 3 varieties to 1, then to bunches so overripe they attracted fruit flies that buzzed around the yellowing fluorescent lights overhead. The staff turnover became constant and unnerving. Friendly faces I'd grown to recognize would disappear without explanation, replaced by overwhelmed teenagers who couldn't answer basic questions about sales or restocking schedules. I'd ask when fresh bread was delivered, and they'd stare at me with blank expressions before mumbling that they didn't know. The experienced cashiers who used to remember my name and ask about my children were replaced by workers who seemed as lost as the customers wandering those increasingly empty aisles. My bus trips to Price Right became increasingly depressing expeditions that I shared with other food refugees like Mr. Silva, a 67-year-old widower who'd started coordinating shopping trips to split taxi costs when the bus schedules became too unreliable. We'd sit together on those hard plastic seats, clutching our shopping lists and calculating whether we had enough cash for both groceries and return transportation. We developed an informal network of bus-riding shoppers who shared information about which days had the best sales and how to time our trips to avoid the longest waits for return transportation. My children's questions evolved from confusion to acceptance to something that broke my heart completely. They stopped asking why we couldn't walk to buy food, as if they'd internalized that fresh, accessible food simply wasn't meant for families like ours. When Elena's friends talked about grabbing snacks after school, she'd just nod and change the subject. Miguel learned to accept whatever I brought home from our grocery expeditions without complaining, even when the bananas were already brown or the bread was day old. By 2013, Price Right's hours had shrunk and produced deliveries became sporadic, leaving shelves empty for days at a time. I was already mentally preparing for the inevitable, teaching my children to appreciate whatever we could get, trying to make scarcity feel like an adventure rather than abandonment. When Price Right finally closed in 2014, I felt a strange relief mixed with terror. At least the slow torture was over, but now we faced something entirely different. The simple act of buying groceries was about to transform into something I never could have imagined. Let me paint you a picture of what grocery shopping looks like when you live in a food desert. It's not shopping anymore. It's mounting an expedition to hostile territory, where every trip feels like a military operation with life or death stakes. Ana Martinez and other residents describe these shopping trips as weekend expeditions requiring lists, carpooling, and multi-store routing, and that's exactly what my monthly routine has become. Carmen and I spend hours on the phone comparing gas prices, checking store flyers, and coordinating our schedules like generals planning a campaign against an enemy that never sleeps. I wake up on shopping day with the same anxiety I imagine soldiers feel before a mission, checking my list 3 times, counting cash until my fingers smell like dirty bills, confirming pickup times with Carmen, and mentally preparing for the physical and emotional exhaustion ahead. My stomach churns with that familiar pre-battle nausea, knowing that one forgotten item or miscalculation could derail our entire food situation for weeks. The night before, I lay out clothes like armor, prepare snacks for the children, and set multiple alarms because oversleeping means missing our narrow window of opportunity. The 20-minute drive to Stop and Shop becomes precious family time, but it's tainted by the knowledge that we're refugees fleeing our own neighborhood's inability to sustain basic human needs. My children press their faces against the windows, watching neighborhoods pass by where families can walk to grocery stores, where corner markets sell actual food instead of overpriced processed survival rations. Elena asks why we can't live somewhere with sidewalks that lead to real stores, and I don't have an answer that doesn't sound like defeat. Between these monthly expeditions, I'm trapped in a cruel economic cycle that feels designed to bleed me dry. I pay $4 for milk at the corner store when I know it costs $2.99 at Stop and Shop, watching my limited budget drain away on overpriced basics, while the store owner counts bills with the satisfaction of someone who knows desperation when he sees it. A loaf of bread that should cost $2 becomes $4 because geography has made me a captive customer in my own neighborhood. The corner stores have become predators, feeding on our desperation, selling expired bread for premium prices, and stocking their shelves with processed foods designed to fill stomachs without nourishing bodies. My children have learned to accept that spontaneous cooking is impossible. If I want to make a recipe that requires fresh herbs or specific vegetables, It means planning a major shopping expedition or abandoning the idea entirely. I've become a food hoarder, maintaining excessive emergency supplies because the fear of running out and facing that 3-hour round trip on a bus with 3 children haunts my daily calculations like a recurring nightmare. Every meal has become a reminder of our geographic imprisonment, where the simple act of feeding my family requires the kind of planning and resources that most people reserve for vacation travel. But the cruelest damage isn't just logistical. It's what this constant struggle has done to the fabric of our family life. The most insidious thing about living in a food desert isn't the hunger in your stomach. It's watching the poison of food insecurity seep into every relationship, every conversation, every moment of joy, until it devours the soul of your family and community. The hunger becomes a parasite that feeds on normalcy, transforming ordinary family interactions into calculations of scarcity and shame that no child should ever have to witness. My daughter Elena, now in high school, has learned to feel embarrassed by our food situation in ways that break my heart daily. She declines invitations to friends' houses because she knows they'll suggest ordering pizza or making spontaneous snacks we can't afford or access. And I watch her practice excuses in the mirror like other teenagers practice asking someone to prom. Like so many students in our situation, Elena often declined playdates involving food, her social isolation imposed by geography and economics that have made her ashamed of something as basic as eating. When friends talk about grabbing ice cream after school or stopping at the mall food court, she just nods and changes the subject, her face flushing with the kind of shame that burrows deep into your bones. My youngest children have developed coping mechanisms that reveal how deeply this poison has spread through their lives. Sophia has learned to prefer the processed foods from corner stores, her palate shaped by scarcity rather than choice, actually recoiling from homemade meals like they're foreign substances. Miguel struggles with the social isolation, declining invitations with practiced ease, while I see the longing in his eyes when friends discuss their spontaneous food adventures. Both of them have learned to hide their lunch bags at school, joining other kids who've developed shame around something as basic as eating. A detail that emerged in community forums where mothers shared their children's survival strategies. The community networks that once held our neighborhood together have dissolved like sugar and bitter coffee. Without the natural gathering places that grocery stores provide, we've lost the organic interactions that build social connections. My relationships with other parents have become transactional rather than social. We coordinate rides to distant stores and share bulk purchases, but the easy camaraderie built around shared recipes and cooking tips has withered away like produce left too long in fluorescent light. I've developed what I call food anxiety, a constant mental calculation of inventory, access, and cost that runs in the background of every conversation, every plan, every moment of potential spontaneity. While other parents discuss weekend plans, I'm calculating whether we have enough milk to last until my next shopping expedition. This anxiety has rewired my brain to see scarcity where abundance should exist, transforming every empty shelf in my kitchen into a source of panic that steals sleep and peace. The isolation metaphor of living on an island has become literal. We're cut off from the normal flow of food culture, unable to participate in the casual food experiences that connect families to their broader community. My children have learned to hide their food-related limitations from friends, developing a shame around something as basic as eating that will probably follow them into adulthood, like a scar that never fully heals. The food desert hasn't just changed what we eat, it's fundamentally altered who we are as a family, how we relate to each other, and how we connect with the world around us. But this systematic destruction of communities happens in plain sight, invisible to those who've never had to question where their next meal will come from. The truth about food deserts isn't just about empty shelves or long bus rides. It's about the slow, systematic starvation of communities that happens one closed store at a time. If my story has made you think twice about that grocery store you pass every day, or made you realize how much of your life revolves around easy access to fresh food, then maybe we can start seeing food deserts for what they really are, a form of community murder in plain sight. Tens of thousands in Woonsocket and millions more nationwide share this fate, trapped in neighborhoods where fresh food has simply vanished. Share your story below. Your voice matters in revealing how food deserts cage communities. Hit like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about the hidden hunger happening across America. Because the truth is, we're an island surrounded by abundance we can't touch.